What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I've got some truly shocking news coming straight out of Washington, D.C., and I'm telling you right now, this development could completely reshape how gun ownership works across America. The Supreme Court of the United States has just made an emergency move that could potentially eliminate firearm permit requirements in all 50 states. And the most surprising part is that the United States Department of Justice is actually supporting this position. I know that sounds unbelievable, but stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll clearly understand what's happening and why it matters so much to anyone who cares about their gun rights. Before we get into the details, I need to mention something important. Take a quick look at the subscribe button below this video. If it isn't red, go ahead and click it right now, because this channel is where you'll find the real updates on gun laws and legal changes that mainstream coverage often ignores or misrepresents. Thousands of people already rely on these updates to stay informed, and you should be part of that community as well. We post new content every single week covering gun news, legal developments, product reviews, and everything responsible gun owners need to know. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important update like the one we're discussing today. Now let's start from the beginning, because this situation has been building for quite a long time and has finally reached a turning point. For decades, several states have enforced strict permit systems that require people to ask the government for permission before carrying a firearm for self-defense. These systems often involve extensive paperwork, high fees, mandatory training courses that cost hundreds of dollars, and long waiting periods that can stretch for months. Even after all that, applicants are sometimes denied for reasons that don't seem clear or consistent. Supporters of these permit systems argue that they are necessary for public safety. Opponents, however, believe they function as barriers that limit who can exercise constitutional rights. Around 2 years ago, a coalition of gun rights organizations decided to challenge these systems in court. They filed lawsuits targeting permit requirements across multiple states, arguing that requiring permits directly conflicts with the constitutional protection of the right to keep and bear arms. They also pointed out that other constitutional rights, such as free speech or freedom of religion, do not require permits, raising the question of why gun rights should be treated differently. That argument began gaining momentum as the case moved through the lower courts before eventually reaching the Supreme Court. Once the court reviewed the case, it determined that the issue was significant enough to consider under emergency circumstances, which is extremely rare. Emergency consideration usually signals that the justices believe the issue is urgent and that people may be affected in real time. Oral arguments were held only a few weeks ago, and according to multiple legal observers, the tone of those arguments suggested that the court may be skeptical of strict permit systems. Several justices asked pointed questions directed at the attorneys defending the regulations, indicating concerns about whether those requirements are consistent with constitutional protections. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Typically, the Department of Justice supports government regulations in cases like this. However, that did not happen here. Instead, the DOJ submitted a brief indicating that many modern permit systems may have become overly complex and burdensome, potentially limiting access for ordinary citizens. According to that filing, rising costs, long delays, and complicated processes can create barriers, especially for working-class individuals who may not have the resources to navigate the system. This position carries significant influence because when the federal government submits a legal brief, it often includes extensive research and nationwide data. The DOJ reviewed information from across the country and argued that additional permit layers may not provide measurable safety benefits while still restricting access for lawful applicants. The filing also emphasized that federal background checks already exist to prevent prohibited individuals from purchasing firearms, suggesting that additional permit steps may duplicate existing safeguards. Even more surprising, several states that currently operate their own permit systems also submitted briefs asking the court to consider striking down those same requirements nationwide. These states argued that maintaining dozens of different regulatory structures creates confusion for both citizens and law enforcement, especially when people travel across state lines. They explained that the lack of uniform standards increases the risk of accidental violations, where individuals may unknowingly break laws simply by crossing into a different jurisdiction. In effect, these states are asking the Supreme Court to establish a single, consistent framework. That alone highlights how complicated the current system has become. Governments that originally created these permit processes are now acknowledging the difficulties they produce. Gun owners have argued for years that the rules are confusing and inconsistent, and now some state officials appear to be reaching similar conclusions. This shift represents a major moment in the legal conversations surrounding firearm regulations. During oral arguments, attorneys representing gun rights organizations presented data they said showed that removing permit requirements in certain states did not increase crime rates. They also shared personal accounts from applicants who claimed they were denied permits for unclear or inconsistent reasons. In addition to statistical arguments, they presented historical claims suggesting that early American firearm laws did not include modern permit structures. They argued that widespread permit systems did not appear until much later, often tied to local policy changes. These historical points appeared to attract interest from some of the justices who frequently evaluate laws based on historical context. On the other side, attorneys defending permit systems argued that states should retain flexibility to create regulations based on their unique populations and environments. They suggested that policies suitable for rural regions may not necessarily apply to dense, urban areas. However, questions were raised about whether constitutional rights should vary depending on geography. The justices also asked for clear evidence showing that permit systems directly reduce crime, and the responses relied heavily on policy arguments rather than consistent nationwide data. One particularly notable moment occurred when a justice asked why individuals who intend to break laws would follow permit requirements in the first place. The question highlighted the broader debate about whether regulatory systems primarily affect lawful citizens rather than criminal activity. That exchange captured the central issue being debated. At this stage, the court has not yet issued a final decision, but based on the arguments presented and the unusual alignment of several parties, including the Department of Justice, this case is being closely watched as one of the most significant gun-related legal developments in years. Now let's talk about what this potential decision could actually mean in practical, everyday terms, because this isn't just a technical legal discussion. It could directly affect how people exercise their rights. If the court ultimately determines that permit requirements are unconstitutional, it could mean that any law-abiding American who is legally allowed to own a firearm would also be able to carry that firearm for self-defense without first obtaining a state-issued permit. Background checks at the point of purchase would still apply, and restricted locations would still exist. But the extra steps involving fees, classes, and long approval timelines could disappear. For individuals living in states with stricter regulatory systems, such as California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Hawaii, the impact could be especially significant. These states currently operate some of the most detailed permit processes in the country, and in certain areas approval can be difficult to obtain. In highly populated cities like New York City, applicants often face additional documentation requirements and extended waiting periods. If the legal framework changes, millions of residents in these areas could see immediate differences in how carry laws are applied. At the same time, the ruling would not only affect stricter states. Even in places where permits are relatively easier to obtain, the removal of application fees, paperwork, and processing delays would simplify the process for lawful gun owners. Another major effect would involve interstate travel. Currently, firearm laws vary significantly from state to state. A person who is legally carrying in one state may unknowingly violate the law by crossing into another jurisdiction with different permit rules. A uniform national standard could reduce that confusion. It's also important to address a question many people are already asking. Would this mean that anyone could carry a firearm anywhere with no limitations? The answer would still be no. Even if permit requirements were removed, existing eligibility rules would remain in place, and individuals prohibited under federal law, such as convicted felons or those with certain domestic violence convictions, would still be unable to legally possess firearms. Background checks conducted through licensed dealers would continue to operate as they do today. In addition, certain locations would remain restricted. Schools, courthouses, government facilities, and secured transportation areas would still enforce existing firearm policies. Private property owners would also retain the ability to restrict firearms on their premises through posted policies. This means the potential change would focus specifically on the permit process itself, not the entire framework of firearm regulations, where other legal responsibilities would remain unchanged as well. Laws addressing safe storage, carrying while under the influence, and the lawful use of self-defense would continue to apply. Responsible ownership would still require education, awareness, and adherence to all applicable rules. Now let's discuss the timeline, because this is something many people are watching closely. Based on analysis from legal observers, a decision could arrive within the next 2 to 3 months. That timeline would be relatively fast compared to many major constitutional cases, which often take much longer to resolve. Once a ruling is released, state governments would need to evaluate their current laws and determine how to align them with the decision. Some states may quickly update their legal frameworks, while others may attempt to revise regulations in ways that maintain certain restrictions. Legal organizations on both sides are already preparing for follow-up litigation, depending on the outcome, meaning the broader legal conversation is likely to continue even after the initial decision. If permit requirements are upheld, the existing systems would largely remain in place, and states would continue operating under their current regulatory structures. That input can shape how the justices consider broader implications beyond a single state's policy. The unusual alignment of multiple states and federal officials has added to the perception that this case carries national significance. Rarely do cases involving firearm policy bring such a diverse range of positions into partial agreement. As we wait for the decision, it's important to remember that Supreme Court rulings do not instantly erase every related regulation. Instead, they establish legal standards that lower courts and state governments must apply moving forward. The practical rollout of any decision may take time. For now, the best course of action is patience, awareness, and continued compliance with current laws. As we bring this discussion to a close, it's clear that this moment represents a significant point in the ongoing conversation surrounding the Second Amendment and firearm regulations in the United States. The case currently under review has the potential to affect millions of Americans, particularly those who have faced complex or restrictive permit systems over the years. The fact that both federal and state-level arguments are playing major roles in this case shows how much the legal landscape has evolved. Policies that once seemed firmly established are now being re-examined, and the outcome could influence how firearm laws are interpreted for many years to come. No matter what the final ruling is, this case highlights how quickly legal frameworks can shift and why staying informed is so important. Changes in constitutional interpretation often shape not only current regulations, but also future legal challenges and legislative actions. While we wait for the final decision, continuing to follow current laws, staying educated about responsible firearm ownership, and keeping track of verified updates remain the most practical steps anyone can take. We will continue monitoring developments closely and provide updates as soon as new information becomes available. When the court releases its decision, there will likely be immediate reactions from lawmakers, legal analysts, and advocacy groups across the country, all working to interpret what the ruling means in real-world terms. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit the like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts about this case. Do you think permit requirements should remain in place, or should they be removed? Your perspective matters, and we'd like to hear it. Also, Share this video with friends and family who are interested in legal developments and firearm policy. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. More content is coming soon, including additional legal analysis, equipment reviews, and practical information for responsible gun owners. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.